5 miles from where I sit, there is a hill that casts a shadow over the Warwickshire countryside, Meon Hill. Geographically, it is just an outpost of the Cotswolds, but in folklore, it is something else entirely. Legends say the devil threw a clod of earth from the ground to try and hit Evesham Abbey, and where it landed became Meon Hill. It is a place where the soil has always been a little too hungry. February the 14th, 1945. The world was celebrating the end of the war. In London, people were looking forward to peace. But here, in the isolated village of Lower Quinton, they were observing a different kind of calendar. It was Ash Wednesday. It was St. Valentine's Day. And if you believe the old traditions, it was in bulk. The time when the earth demands a sacrifice to ensure the harvest. Charles Walton was 74. He was a man out of time. He lived in a tiny cottage with his niece, Edith. He walked with a stick. He suffered from rheumatism, but the locals didn't see a frail old man. They saw a cunning man. They whispered he could tame wild horses with a single word, that birds would eat from his hand while avoiding everyone else, that he bred natterjack toads, creatures that don't belong in this part of England, in his back garden. At 9 a.m, Charles picked up his tools, a pitchfork and a slash hook, a vicious curved blade used for stripping hedges. He told Edith he'd be back by 4 for his tea. He walked into the fog of Firs Farm and vanished into folklore. Twilight settles early in February. By 6 o'clock, the cottage was silent. Edith knew something was wrong. Charles was a creature of habit. He never missed his tea. She panicked. She grabbed a neighbour, Harry Beasley, and they ran to the farm. They found the manager, Alfred Potter, standing in the yard. Potter's behaviour was strange. He didn't suggest searching the barns or the sheds. He walked immediately, with terrifying certainty, toward a ditch near a willow tree. "He's over there," Potter said. When the beam of the torch cut through the darkness, Harry Beasley gasped. The brutality of what they found shocked the police surgeon. Charles Walton hadn't just been murdered, he had been pinned. His own pitchfork had been driven violently through his neck, the tines burying inches deep into the frozen earth, anchoring him to the soil. The slash hook, that curved hedging blade, was buried in his throat. A cross was carved into his chest. Professor Webster from the West Midlands Forensic Science Laboratory noted that the assailant must have possessed maniacal strength. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Charles had no money. This was personal. It was frenzied. And to the villagers who stared from behind the curtains, it looked like a ritual. To stop a witch from rising from the grave, you pinned them to the earth. Charles Walton wasn't just killed, he was silenced. The Warwickshire Constabulary knew they were beaten. The silence in the village was absolute, so they made the call to London. Enter Chief Inspector Robert Fabian. Fabian of the Yard. He was the most famous detective in Britain, a man of science, fingerprints and urban logic. He had dismantled London gangs and solved the unsolvable. He arrived in Lower Quinton expecting a domestic murder. He brought microscopes and rationality. He was met with a wall of silence. Fabian quickly zeroed in on Alfred Potter. Potter was the farm manager. He owed Walton money. He had a reputation for a violent temper. But more importantly, Potter was lying. He told Fabian he'd been in the field at 12 o'clock. Then he changed it to 12:20. He claimed he was checking a heifer in a ditch. Fabian checked the farm logs and found the heifer had drowned the day before. Potter was scrambling. But lies aren't proof. Fabian needed a smoking gun, and in a casual conversation, Potter gave him one. Potter mentioned to the police that he had seen Walton working in the distance in his shirt sleeves, meaning without his jacket. When the body was found, Walton was wearing his jacket. Fabian was confused. Until the autopsy report came back from the lab. Charles Walton was wearing a jacket, but underneath it, the sleeves of his woolen shirt had been cut off with a knife. Potter was right. Walton had been in his shirt sleeves, but the only way Potter could have known that is if he was standing over the body when the jacket was put back on. It was a detail only the killer could know. Fabian pressed him. He interrogated him for hours, but Potter didn't break. He stared back with the flat, hard look of a man who feared the soil more than the law, and without a confession, the Crown Prosecution Service refused to charge him. Fabian wanted a motive. The village gave him a ghost story. He discovered that this wasn't the first time the hills had seen blood. 70 years earlier, in 1875, a woman named Anne Tennant was murdered in the neighbouring village of Loncopton. She was 80 years old. She was killed by a local farm labourer with a pitchfork. He claimed she was a witch. He claimed she commanded toads. To the locals, 1945 wasn't a new crime. It was an old habit. The harvest of 1944 had been a disaster. The crops had rotted. The cattle were sick. In the old ways, a witch can blast a farm, and the only way to break the curse is to spill the witch's blood and return it to the earth. Was Alfred Potter a greedy man trying to hide a debt? Or was he a desperate farmer, terrified that Charles Walton was destroying his livelihood with black magic? The case broke Fabian. He was a man of logic, but the atmosphere of Meon Hill began to seep into him. One evening, he saw a black dog run across the road on the hill, a spectral omen of death in local folklore. Moments later, his police car was run off the road. The great detective packed his bags. He left Lower Quinton without a conviction. Years later, in the 1960s, workers tearing down an outbuilding at Alfred Potter's farm found something in the cesspit. Charles Walton's missing tin watch. Potter claimed it must have fallen there. It was the final piece of the puzzle, found too late. Potter died a free man. In his memoirs, Fabian wrote that the silence of Lower Quinton terrified him more than the falling bombs of the Blitz. He offered one final piece of advice. I advise anyone who is tempted at any time to venture into black magic, witchcraft, shamanism, to steer clear of it. Fabian of the Yard solved every case in his career, except the one on Meon Hill.